ever feel like happiness is this, like reward, this elusive reward for, living a good life? Like, first you have to achieve all the things.
Right.
And then you get to be happy. You unlock happiness.
Yeah, the classic success then happiness equation.
Exactly. But what if it's actually like the other way around? What if we've had it backwards this whole time? That's what we're diving into today, this idea of the happiness advantage. It's based on Shawn Achor's work. And he argues that happiness, it's not the result of success, but the cause.
Well, really powerful reframe. And I think the reason why that is because, we are wired, our brains are naturally wired to focus on the negative, right? Like threats, dangers that kept our ancestors alive.
Right.
But that ancient wiring isn't always so helpful in our modern world.
So true. It's like, when you're about to give a presentation and your brain decides to pull up that one time you totally tripped on stage in middle school.
Oh, yeah.
Like, why? Why are you doing this to me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our brains love to do that, dredge up those negative memories. But the good news is we can actually retrain our brains to be more positive, to be more resilient.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we rewire for happiness?
Yeah.
Where do we even start?
Well, Achor kicks things off with a fascinating study on squirrel monkeys.
Okay, squirrel monkeys, I'm intrigued.
So they had to learn this task to grab food pellets through this tiny hole.
Okay.
And the hole kept getting smaller. So it was a real test of their coordination, their adaptation.
Right, like how small can you go and still get that pellet?
Exactly. And here's the fascinating part. The monkeys who mastered the task, their brains actually grew.
What?
Yeah. The area of their brains responsible for that specific skill, it got bigger.
So they were like physically changing their brain structure.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is it happened within their lifespan, right? It's not like it took generations for this to evolve. It proves that our brains are way more plastic, way more adaptable than we once thought.
So we're not just like stuck with the brain we were born with.
Yep.
That's kind of empowering.
It is.
I don't know, that just makes me think about, like, have you heard of that study with the London cab drivers?
Yeah.
Their hippocampi?
Yes.
Which is the part of the brain that, like, deals with spatial memory, like navigating a map. Theirs are actually larger because they drive those crazy London streets all day long.
Exactly. Our actions, our thoughts, even our environments, they're constantly shaping our brains.
Wow.
Which then begs the question, what are we feeding our minds?
Right.
If we're constantly stressed, if we're constantly negative, our brain is going to adapt accordingly.
Right.
But the opposite is also true.
So, like, how do we feed our minds more positivity? I love that Achor in the book. He talks about how he struggled to explain this whole concept of happiness. Like, what is happiness?
Yeah.
To a group of Samsung executives because, get this, they didn't speak English.
It's true. A universal language for happiness. Who knew?
Right. But it's so true. Like, it highlights that happiness isn't this fixed destination.
Right.
It's not like you check these boxes and then, boom, you've arrived at happiness. It's so many more about how we perceive the world, right? And that is something that we can actually train and work on.
It is.
But how do we make that shift? Like, how do we go from a negative mindset to a more positive one?
Yeah. Well, one fascinating study that he highlights involved doctors and lollipops.
Okay, what? Doctors and lollipops, how are those two things related?
I know. It sounds strange. So doctors who were given candy before diagnosing patients were not only faster at making those diagnoses, but they were also more creative in their approach.
Wait, so you're telling me a lollipop a day keeps the bad diagnoses away?
Maybe. It speaks to the power of even small positive boosts, right? It wasn't necessarily about the lollipop itself,
right,
but the subtle shift it created in their mindset, and that rippled out into their work.
So those little, like, seemingly insignificant moments of joy, those little boosts we get throughout the day, those actually matter.
They can. They absolutely can.
Yeah.
But it's not just about these one-off moments, right? It's about really rewiring our brains for long-term change.
So how do we do that? How do we actually rewire our brains for that long-term positivity?
Yeah, well, Achor uses this really interesting analogy he calls the Tetris effect.
Okay.
And you know how, like, if you play Tetris for hours on end, you start seeing those falling blocks everywhere?
Oh, yeah.
That's the Tetris effect. Our brains get wired for whatever we repeatedly focus on.
Right. Like, it's not even on purpose. You just, like, can't unsee it.
Exactly.
Achor was saying that after he played, I think it was Grand Theft Auto, for a while he was driving in real life and looking at all the parked cars like they were potential getaway vehicles.
Yeah, that's our brains on autopilot. But the hopeful flip side is if we can rewire our brains for the negative, we can rewire them for the positive too, right?
It's like we have the power to choose our own mental software.
Yeah.
Instead of accidentally installing like the doom and gloom program, we can opt for the sunshine and rainbows version.
I like that.
Right. Sign me up for that one.
Right, exactly.
But how do we actually make that switch?
Well, one surprisingly effective exercise that Aker recommends is called 3 Good Things.
Okay.
It's so simple. You take just a few minutes each day to write down 3 good things that happened.
That sounds almost too simple.
I know, right?
Is there more to it than that? What's the catch?
Well, it's about actively directing our attention toward the positive, right? So instead of dwelling on what went wrong, you're intentionally searching for what went right.
Right.
And over time, this rewires our brains to just be more attuned to the good stuff.
Okay, so it's like training your brain to be a happiness detective.
Yeah, exactly.
Constantly on the lookout for those little wins.
Yes.
I like it. But what about when, things inevitably go wrong?
Of course.
Because, life, it likes to throw those curveballs our way, right? You can't always control that.
Absolutely. And Aker talks about this concept of falling up.
Falling up.
Which is essentially turning those setbacks into growth opportunities.
Okay.
And he actually got to experience this firsthand in a college experiment, which is kind of hilarious.
Okay, wait. Is this the one where they made him walk down the hallway and purposely made him fall?
Yes.
I love that story.
It's called the Helping the Elderly experiment.
Okay.
They told participants they were going to help elderly people, and then, unbeknownst to them, they rigged this hallway to make them fall, and then they studied their reactions to this sudden setback.
Okay, so that's hilarious and also, slightly terrifying. I'm sure there was some consent form somewhere, but still.
Exactly.
So what did they find? Did people just, lie there in defeat?
No. And that's the amazing thing. It highlighted the incredible resilience of the human spirit.
Wow.
Because even after being deliberately tripped, people found ways to reframe the situation, get back up, and keep going.
So it's like, even when life throws us a curveball, we still have the power to choose how we respond to it.
Yes, exactly.
We can either stay down or we can find a way to fall up.
Yes.
But how do you actually do that? Especially in the moment when you're, in the thick of it.
Yeah, well, it's about shifting our mindset, and Aker talks about the importance of what he calls our explanatory style.
Okay, our explanatory style.
Yeah, so how do we explain the events in our lives? Do we see setbacks as temporary or permanent? Isolated or impacting everything?
So, if you miss a deadline at work, do you think, ugh, I'm terrible at my job.
Yeah.
This is hopeless. I should just give up now.
Yeah, or the opposite.
Or is it more like, okay, this one slipped through the cracks, but, I can learn from it. I can do better next time.
Exactly. And people with more of an optimistic explanatory style, those who see setbacks as challenges to learn from rather than personal failures, they're much more likely to bounce back, learn from those experiences, and actually use them as fuel for future success.
Right. So it's really not about, never failing. It's about how you interpret those failures and what you do with them.
100%. It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right.
But with actual scientific backing.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just a motivational poster.
Exactly.
But it takes a conscious effort, right?
It does.
To cultivate that optimistic explanatory style.
It does, to really see those setbacks not as roadblocks, but as stepping stones, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually where his concept of the Zorro Circle comes in.
Ah, yes, the Zorro Circle. Okay, I love this one. Can you remind us again how that one works?
Of course. So remember in the movie, Zorro starts his training by literally fighting within this small circle, right? And as he gets better, as he masters those skills, he gradually expands the circle.
Yeah.
And it's this brilliant metaphor for how we can approach challenges in our own lives.
Right, because when we're feeling overwhelmed, our brains, they crave a sense of control, right?
Absolutely.
So instead of trying to tackle everything at once, we can start small.
Yeah.
We can draw a Zorro circle around a manageable area of our lives.
Exactly. Create that circle of control where you can actually have a tangible impact.
Right.
And then as you achieve those small wins within that circle, your confidence grows and you gradually expand your sphere of influence.
So if you're feeling, totally swamped at work, instead of trying to conquer your entire inbox, you could set a Zorro circle around responding to just 3 important emails.
Exactly.
You're still making progress, but you're doing it in a way that feels, manageable, less overwhelming.
100%. And those small wins, they create this snowball effect that propels you towards those larger successes.
I love that. This is all so encouraging, but I have to admit, even when you know all this stuff, like
Right?
putting it into practice is a whole other thing.
It is.
You know, our brains are like hardwired for those easy, instant gratification kind of things.
Totally.
Not those long-term good-for-you habits.
Yeah. Well, this is where understanding our brain's wiring can actually be incredibly helpful.
Okay.
And Acor talks about something called the 20-second rule.
The 20-second rule. Intrigued. Tell me more.
All right, so it's not quite time travel or anything,
Okay.
but it is about outsmarting our brains a little bit.
Okay, I'm in.
Okay. He found that even small barriers, those that take just 20 seconds to overcome, can totally derail even our best intentions.
So these small barriers, these 20-second barriers, give me an example. Like, what are we talking about here?
Okay, so think about like you get home from work, you're exhausted, you plan to hit the gym,
Right.
but then you see your comfy couch just sitting there.
Oh, it's calling my name.
Right.
No.
Exactly. It's just so easy to plop down. Or you want to eat healthy, but the junk food is just way easier to grab than, chopping up veggies.
It's true. It's true. So is the 20-second rule like, are you supposed to do something for 20 seconds? I don't follow.
No, it's about making those positive habits 20 seconds easier, and those tempting bad habits,
Right.
Those are the ones we want to make just 20 seconds harder.
Okay.
So like small things.
So like putting your gym bag by the door so it's ready to go.
Exactly. Laying out your workout clothes the night before, or,
Yeah.
if you have that bag of chips that you're always tempted by, put it up on a high shelf instead of right out on the counter.
Yeah. So you have to like think twice before you reach for it.
Exactly. It's not about relying on willpower alone. It's about understanding our brain's tendencies and then setting ourselves up for success.
It's like we're building those positive grooves into our daily routines, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And speaking of routines, Uyghur also talks about like the importance of social connection and how it's not just about our own individual happiness, right? Like it actually affects those around us too.
Yeah, absolutely. Our emotions are contagious, both positive and negative. You know that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with?
Right.
It's kind of like that, but for feelings.
So you're saying like if I spend all my time with like super upbeat, positive people,
Yeah.
I'm more likely to like absorb some of that good energy.
Exactly. And on the flip side, if you're constantly surrounded by like negative Nancys.
Right. Yeah. Your mood is going to take a nosedive.
Exactly. And Acor talks about this really interesting study where they had people watch this silent video of someone experiencing pain, like physical pain.
Okay, so I'm watching this video. I'm not the one getting hurt. But just the act of seeing someone else in pain can actually trigger a response in my own brain.
Yeah, and it's because of these things called mirror neurons. They're these amazing little cells in our brain that fire not only when we perform an action, but when we observe someone else doing it.
Wow.
So we're literally wired for empathy, both physically and emotionally.
That's kind of cool, though, that we're wired that way. But that also means, like, positive emotions, those are contagious, too. So, like, a smile, a kind word.
Yeah, a small act of kindness.
Those all have this ripple effect.
They really do. They can boost the happiness and the performance of those around us, and it creates this more positive, more productive environment for everyone.
So it's like we're all kind of interconnected in a way. Like those positive vibes, they really do have the power to create like this wave of good.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I love that.
So, if happiness is the skill we can cultivate, and if it impacts not only our own success, but the success of those around us, I mean, what's one small change that you, dear listener, can make today to start shifting your mindset towards the positive?
Yeah. What's that one little nudge you can give yourself? Maybe it is starting that 3 Good Things journal. Maybe it's reaching out to a colleague that you haven't connected with in a while.
Right.
Or even just taking a moment to appreciate, the good that's already present in your life.
Right, exactly. And remember, just like the Tetris effect, it's about rewiring our brains over time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Exactly.
So be patient with yourself, Happiness, it's not this finish line that you cross and then you're done.
It's a journey.
It's the journey itself. And it's a journey best taken together, right? Like supporting each other along the way.
100%.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the happiness advantage.
Yes.
We hope you've resurfaced with some practical strategies to start rewiring your thinking for, not just greater success, but also greater happiness in your work, in your life, in all areas.
Absolutely.
And until next time, keep diving.